Welcome to The Explainer. So today we are diving headfirst into the single most documented war in history. But we're looking exactly where few people usually look. We're heading straight for the margins. You know, World War II is an era we almost always view through this massive macro lens, right? We're talking massive troop movements, famous generals, sweeping political changes. But today we're going to zoom all the way in, right down to the ground level.
So think you know everything about World War II? Well, I want you to just completely forget about those sweeping global strategies for a minute. Are you ready to focus on the intimate, frankly surprising stories that actually define the era? Because behind all those staggering statistics we always hear about, well, there are individual lives, unexpected friendships, and believe it or not, some totally incredible animal contributions that you are definitely not going to find in a standard history syllabus.
We've essentially put together this curated mosaic of deeply human and, like I said, sometimes animal vignettes that really bring the true scale of the war to life. These are those raw stories of profound courage, of compassion, and sacrifice. They literally remind us of the beating heart right there beneath the cold machinery of global conflict.
Okay, so here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to start off with some unlikely animal recruits, then we'll look at a friendship that went way beyond enemy lines, uncover some unsung heroes of the Pacific, and finally, we'll take some time to honor the ultimate sacrifice.
All right, jumping right into Section 1, the unlikely animal recruits, from giants to terriers. It's crazy to think about, but some of the absolute bravest soldiers of the war didn't even volunteer. Actually, they didn't even have a voice at all. Yet, they served so loyally, transported vital equipment, and honestly, saved countless lives. Just look at the staggering contrast in how these animals served. I mean, it's night and day. Over in Burma, you had this massive Asian elephant named Bandoola. Bandoola literally led 45 other elephants and 64 refugees up a sheer 270-foot sandstone cliff just to escape the advancing Japanese forces. That's a 27-story building of sheer rock. Then, on the complete flip side, consider the microscopic scale. Enter Smoky. Smoky was a tiny 4-pound Yorkshire Terrier bought for a mere 2 Australian pounds in New Guinea. Now, at the Lingayen Gulf in the Philippines, there was this absolutely crucial communications wire that needed to be run under a runway, right through a 70-foot culvert. Doing it by hand, that would have taken 70 men 3 whole days of digging, and it would have completely halted all Allied planes. No way they could afford that. So instead, they just tied a string to Smoky's collar, and she shimmied through all that dirt and mold, getting the whole job done in about 3 minutes. Talk about a game changer.
But here's the best part. Smoky wasn't just doing heavy labor. She actually, kind of accidentally, became one of the world's very first therapy dogs. Yeah, after her owner came down with dengue fever, the nurses actually let her into the hospital, and she turned out to be this incredible comfort to everyone. She ended up traveling with the American Red Cross, performing little tricks and visiting wounded soldiers all across the Pacific. I love this quote from Barbara Wood Smith from the Red Cross in 1944, calling Smoky a wonderful morale builder. It just perfectly captures how absolutely vital a tiny little dog's presence was to war-weary troops who were stuck lying in hospital beds for months on end.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, Friendship Beyond Enemy Lines, looking at the 1936 Olympics. This is where we really see how profound, personal connections can just completely defy the most toxic ideologies of the time. So picture this, August 1936, the Berlin Olympics. The tension is incredibly high. Black American athlete Jesse Owens had just fouled twice in the long jump. He had literally 1 attempt left before facing elimination. And right then, his German competitor, a guy named Luz Long, steps up. Long actually shared a jumping technique with Owens that helped him qualify. And when Owens went on to win the gold medal with a massive jump of 8.06 meters, actually defeating Long, who took silver, Long was the very first person to run up and congratulate him. Right there, right in front of the entire Nazi leadership, a white German athlete and a black American athlete walked arm in arm through the Olympic Stadium. Naturally, Long got a stern talking to by Nazi officials later on, but you know what? It didn't matter. Their friendship was forged for life.
That bond they formed, it was heartbreakingly cemented in Luz's final letter to Jesse. He wrote it while serving in the German Wehrmacht, surrounded by, as he put it, dry sand and wet blood. He just sensed that he probably wasn't going to make it out alive. So he asked Jesse to one day find his young son Kai and deliver this exact message. Tell him how things can be between men on this earth. Luz Long was tragically killed in action in Sicily in 1943. He was only 30 years old. But years later, in 1951, Jesse Owens actually kept that promise. He traveled all the way to Germany,
found Kai, and, get this, he even stood as the best man at Kai's wedding. Just incredible.
Wow. Let's transition over to Section 3, the Pacific's Unsung Heroes, focusing on the Coast Guard and Marines. Because now, we really need to turn our attention to the downright harrowing logistical realities of amphibious assaults. Executing an amphibious assault somewhere like Peleliu, it wasn't just storming a beach. It required a flawlessly timed 5-step plan. The planners had to orchestrate this massive, incredibly complex transfer of men. They'd start way out on giant transport ships, move into LSTs, that's landing ship tanks, and eventually transfer down to small, tracked amphibious vehicles called Amtraks. But it's that last step, that final deadly 1,000-yard dash across the reef right to the shore. That required navigating jagged coral reefs, concrete obstacles, hidden mines, all while relying on just absolute nerve under incredibly heavy enemy fire.
And the conditions that were actually waiting for them on the island? Unimaginable. The temperature on Peleliu soared to a blistering 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The pre-landing bombardments had completely wiped out the foliage, meaning there was literally zero shade. None. And to make matters worse, some of the drinking water they brought ashore had been stored in uncleaned empty gasoline barrels, which obviously made it totally undrinkable. Planners initially predicted this operation would take a few days. Instead, it devolved into this grueling 74-day battle in an absolute blistering hellscape. Now, right in the thick of it, right alongside the Marines and the Navy, you had the Coast Guard. They performed some of the absolute most dangerous, unsung jobs of the entire war. During the D-Day Normandy invasion, the Coast Guard deployed 60 wooden cutters. They affectionately nicknamed them the Matchbook Fleet. These were specifically modified to trail behind the very first landing waves, their sole job being to pluck drowning troops straight out of the English Channel. They pulled off 1,438 rescues that day alone. But if you want to talk about unmatched bravery, look at Signalman First Class Douglas Munro over at Guadalcanal. A battalion of 500 Marines had gotten entirely trapped on a beachhead. Munro didn't hesitate. He daringly led a group of Higgins boats right in. He purposely positioned his own very lightly armed craft squarely between the Japanese forces and the heavily loaded rescue boats. He basically acted as a human shield. Tragically, Munro was fatally struck by enemy fire, but you know what his final words to his best friend were? He just asked, "Did they get off?" And because of him, they did. To this day, he remains the only Coast Guardsman ever to receive the Medal of Honor.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 4, Honoring the Ultimate Sacrifice, Enduring Memory. After everything we've just discussed, elephants scaling cliffs, defying dictators, unsung heroes on blistering beaches, we really have to pause and reckon with the truly immense scale of what was lost. Today, over 140,000 American military members are interred overseas across 26 American Battle Monuments Commission cemeteries. That is a staggering number. And there are another 94,000 names listed on the walls of the missing, folks who were lost at sea or whose remains simply were never found. When you actually walk these grounds, looking at row after row of Christian crosses and stars of David, you realize something so profound. Thousands upon thousands of these young men and women died long before the war even ended. They never even got to know who won.
The motto of the American Battle Monuments Commission states simply, "Time will not dim the glory of their deeds." From a massive elephant building bridges in the deepest jungles, to opposing athletes choosing to walk arm in arm in the face of hatred, to a brave Coast Guardsman laying down his life as a human shield. These incredible moments from the margins of history, they are what truly define our humanity. So, to wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. As time marches on, what will we do to make sure these deeply human stories of wartime sacrifice are never, ever dimmed?